Namo Buddhai, Namo Dhammai, Namo Sanghai. Jai Bhim you all and welcome you all in Navayana Buddhist Sangha short dialogue. And we have with us a senior member of Navayana Buddhist Sangha, Bodhi S.R. Today we will discuss the very important concepts of Buddhism called Khanda. And I request her to please throw some light on how we as a follower of Dr. Ambedkar understand this concept called Khanda and what is the importance in today's context to understand this concept of Khanda. So please, sir, reflect on this very important concept.
Thank you, Sujit. This is really a very important concept in Buddhism, and we need to have a good understanding, especially people like us who have come to Buddhism through Baba Sahib Ambedkar. To get directly into a discussion about the khandas, I think the first thing that we need to state for anybody interested is that they have to know the Patiksha Samupada well, because the khandas are properly located theoretically within the Patiksha Samupad. Now, what do these khandas refer to? They refer to a collection of smaller and simpler elements or units or even processes that together constitute and produces our human experience. This human experience that we have as humans is constituted from a Buddhist perspective by the khandas. Now, what are these khandas? Shakyamuni in the Khanda Sutta refers to 5 of these simpler, smaller, processual elements. The first is he called Rupam Khanda, which is generally translated as form, matter, and substance. The second one he refers to as Vedana Khanda, refers to sensation and feelings. The third is Sanya Khanda, which refers to perception. Sometimes it's translated to the word cognize, to cognize something. The fourth is Sankhara, often translated to mental fabrications, but also others speak about it as referring to these compound things that pass through the inconceivable rapid movement of rising, peaking, and passing away. And this happens a very deep process. Sankhara is at number 2 of the law of dependent origination. And the fifth thing he refers to Vijnana or Vijnanam, consciousness. But in the khandas, the Vijnanam is interpreted as consciousness arising out of contact. There are multiple layers of consciousness that is spoken about in Buddhism. Vijnanam in the khandas is referring to consciousness that comes out of the commonsensical or the sensation that exists at the level of the 5 senses plus the mind, and when it comes to contact with the external world. So what is important to understand about these 5 khandas which Shakyamuni spoke about is that Shakyamuni laid them in a very interesting framework. This framework he refers to as the need to understand Rupam, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnanam within the past, present, and the future. In short, time. Within near and far distance. The internal and the external subjective experience and the objective experience that we have in our reality. Within blatant or subtle, as in overt experience, something that you can immediately see, and underlying or so-called covert appearance that you cannot easily see. And he refers to as this also in a framework of common and sublime. Common as in that which is available to our common sense immediately, and sublime is the theoretical aspects that it underlies that something that is not so easily seen, but it's also very beautiful. So within this particular framework, he locates these khandas. So we must understand it as a process. Khandas has to be understood as a process. Don't look at khandas as static entities constituting something. These khandas are in a process of movement. Now, if anybody asks us, who is a self? How do you define self in Buddhism? A self in Buddhism is constituted by these processual movements of the khandas that comes together to create the human experience. In other schools of thought, if you go to psychology, if you go to behavioral psychology, they refer to the self as constituting of cognition, affect, and behavior. If you go to psychoanalysis and the Freudian school, they generally refer as the it, ego, superego. If you go to religion and theology, they look at the self as a perfect creation of God. In Buddhism, the self is only constituted by these 5 khandas that produces us our human experience. Now, what is important to kind of further detail the process is to refer to the experience of Shakyamuni himself. While in deep absorption in the state of Satipatthana, which he was practicing, and he was interrogating what is generally called the Patiksha Samuppat, and this is very important, he began to have direct experience of these khandas. He realized that this I, this self, this me, which is spoken of as Atta, sometimes translated as soul also. This Atta, this I, self, me, soul, this Atta actually is Anatta. No self, no I, no soul. It is non-self, non-I, and non-soul. Instead, it exists as a construct. It doesn't exist in and by itself as a static entity. Instead, it exists only as a construct. This I is a construct, the self is a construct. And this construct is fueled by concepts, by images, by symbols, by events, all coming together in a memory that then begins the meaning-making process that then begins to shape our experiences of this world. Most of our world is experienced through concepts. It is rare for us to begin to experience the reality as it is. We experience the reality conceptually. So what is important here is that Shakyamuni mentions one beautiful point. He says that these constructs have come to be simply because of a state of conditions, or what he says, the necessary condition. It is a necessary condition that exists that gives rise to another necessary condition. And this I, this construct, this self, which he then called Anatta, arises only because of the existence of necessary conditions. Shakyamuni mentions a very beautiful line here. He says that while referring to these processes, he says, Sabhe Sankhara Anicca, all that is Sankhara is in a state of impermanence, a state of disintegration, a state of entropy. Sabhe Sankhara Dukkha, this state of entropy, this state of disintegration, this state of impermanence creates a lot of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, all of Dhamma is Anatta. The self does not even exist at all. So for this, he explained it in a very beautiful sutta. It's called the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, which I think all of us must read because it is important to kind of provide us the deep insights that Shakyamuni had. He was supposedly to be speaking to the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis, and he was asking them, referring to the khandas. He says that, this thing you call the rupam, vedana, sanya, sankhara, vijnana, form, sensation, perception, mental fabrication, this whole idea of consciousness. Is it constant or is it inconstant? So the bhikkhu says it is inconstant. Then he further goes and says, if something is inconstant in a state of, disintegration, in a state of entropy, is it easeful or is it stressful? So they said, naturally, it is stressful because, when you're in a state of changing all the time, it creates stress at a very deep level. Some of us don't even realize that this change is taking place. That's a different issue. But from the insights of Shakyamuni, deeper you go, you realize that it's all state of impermanence. And this is the fundamental reason for stress. So then he says further, that which is constantly changing in a state of impermanence, can you call that the I? Can you identify that as the self? Can you say, this is mine, this is me, this is who I am, this is myself? Can you say that? And the bhikkhu says, no, it is not possible to say that this is you, because this is subjected to change, subjected to deterioration, subjected to disintegration. And then he went on to explain, in the sutta by explaining another aspects of it. He says, if that is the case, then you need to know how these things come to be. How does this self come to be? And this is contained in a beautiful line called the Pancha Upadana Khanda. Now Shakyamuni directly refers to the Patiksha Samuppada. He says that these khandas, they begin to cohere, they begin to come together because of the process of upadana, translated as clinging, grasping, personalization. But what do we cling to? We cling to what he calls craving and aversion, which is generally refers to as tanha. But what is it that we crave? We crave for the pleasant sensation, and we are averse to the unpleasant sensation. So he says it is this clinging to these processes of both Vedana and Tanha that can give rise to these aggregates or the khandas to come together. And it is clinging that offers sustenance and begin what is called the mental fermentation process, the creation of concepts, of ideas, the learning of languages, and so on and so forth. And then we begin to experience a world and see it from the eyes of these concepts. Now, after he had a direct experience of these khandas, and he was able to see through, he realized this is not the self. This thing which I took for granted as the self is not me at all. And he explains that the minute I had this direct experience of this khandas, I became detached. I became disenchanted. Disenchantment grows because I realize who this self that I've taken for granted as me, it is not me at all. And with this disenchantment, one becomes dispassionate. One loses what is called the emotions and the disturbance that basically is there all the time in your being as you experience. And through this dispassion, one is released. With release, he says, comes through knowledge. Now, this is generally what is generally called the Anatta Lakhana Sutta. It's a beautiful sutta. But there's a critical message for here, that this message of the idea of dispassionate, this idea of dispassion, this is critical because these khandas and the way they create the disturbance in the realms of the emotions is very fundamental for us to understand. When your emotions, when these emotions that we have are experienced as real, like we experience the emotion as real, and these emotions are so powerful, sometimes you get carried away by emotions, like you're imprisoned by emotions in your life. Now, this critical insight was also very important insight for Baba Saheb Ambedkar, because Baba Saheb began to realize, and if you look at the writings of Baba Saheb, the Buddha and his Dhamma, especially part 2, number 269, Baba Saheb indirectly refers to the khandas. Baba Saheb says that all created things perish, referring to the compound nature of reality. All created things perish. He who knows and sees this becomes passive to pain, is free from emotions controlling you. All forms are unreal. He who knows and sees this become passive to pain. These are the two lines that refers to the khandas. Now, why is it important for us followers of Baba Saheb to know this? Is because there is a political aspect to this emotion. We live in a reality where there's vested interest who wants to insult you, who wants to dehumanize you, who want to ridicule you, who want to overpower you, who want to control you all the time. And one line from that person who has vested interest to control you can turn you into an emotional wreck. You can be so fueled by emotions that you can't even think properly. You are so subsumed in emotions that disturbs you all the time that you begin just doing nothing but react to reality rather than, thoughtfully, rationally be reflexive about reality. So this kind of a understanding, this insight from Shakyamuni about how disenchantment grows, dispassion arises, and knowledge is kind of attained is something very fundamental. Now, but one thing important to note here is Baba Saheb refers to this as he gives us a warning. He says that, be careful. This knowledge is a very important that arises from it, but be careful, because he who does not rouse oneself when it is time to rise, who though young and strong is full of sloth and laziness, whose will and thought are very weak, that lazy and idle being never finds the way to knowledge. There are two types of being who will just live life probably like a zombie, and there were those who will put effort in order to attain this knowledge. But what kind of knowledge are we referring to? We are referring to the knowledge that is free from passion, a knowledge that is free and over and above emotions, an insight into reality in which emotion doesn't have a role to defining your decisions in life. To me personally, this is one of the many reasons that Baba Sahib converted to Buddhism. This is one of the key insights from Shakyamuni that he attained. So it is important because in the light of the discussion we are having, there were so many other frameworks that were available to Baba Sahib. He did not turn to theism, he did not turn to atheism, he did not turn to agnosticism. Because none of these frameworks have an answer to this kind of a reality that he was experiencing in his life. So if you were to look back, now everything comes together, because it brings so many things that Baba Sahib was searching for. Baba Sahib was searching for a framework that will provide and give us liberation and happiness. He was concerned about a framework that will help me get, liberation in this life and happiness in this life. And all of these, together with this idea of Shakyamuni's insight into emotions and knowledge, brought together what we know today as Baba Sahib's Buddhism. So it is in this kind of an understanding, probably just to close and to end this discussion today, that the Buddhism that we have got from Baba Sahib has come together in such a manner around this idea of the khandas, many more aspects, which then adds up and can creates this whole framework that we have today. One probably is the fact that with this insight, he was free from being trapped by the atheists, the theists, and the agnostic kind of a debate and argument or framework. The second thing is this insight also holds very well to what is generally called in concurrence with science and rationality. It doesn't go against rationality or science at all. It is Buddhism in this light is also very contextual. It's rooted to people day-to-day experiences of emotions, day-to-day experiences of our life. It is contextual in nature. At the same time, such a conception is premised on a very unique conception of change: anicca, 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 impermanence, entropy, disintegration. It is also directed towards the liberation of mind. I think this is fundamental. This is directed towards liberation of mind, towards seeking truth, in that sense. So this whole way of looking is how do I know truth? How do I attain this freedom of mind? Is very fundamental to understanding the larger framework around this concept of khandas. It is also tuned to social transformation. It is sensitive to social relations. But to me, above all else, I think this insight kind of situates the human being very, very properly in the process of healing. Not only individual healing, but social healing. And both these healing and social healing, from years and years of deeply embedded historical hurt, is how we should begin to look not only at Baba Sahib's Buddhism, but also to locate khandas within the larger framework of what we call today the Buddhism that we have received from Baba Sahib Ambedkar. So with these few words, I want to end here, Sujit, and probably we can take this discussion deeper in the next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for this deep insight, deep reflection, and give us a new framework, a new frame of reference for understanding the khandas. Thank you all for watching this video, and we will come back with a new video, new concepts. And if you like this video, please subscribe our channel and press the bell icon. Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya.